The hidden manuscript. The story begins in the quiet heart of an ancient city where the streets are filled with the scent of old paper, ink, and the echo of forgotten voices. In the National Institute of Antiquities, a young researcher named Aisha spends her days surrounded by manuscripts that carry the weight of centuries. Her life is calm and predictable, yet filled with curiosity about the mysteries of the past. She is skilled at reading old languages and piecing together fragments of history that others have long forgotten. One day, while working in the archive section, she notices something unusual. A bundle of manuscripts is delivered for preservation. Most of them are ordinary, filled with records of trade, old family lineages, and fragments of poetry. Yet among them lies a single manuscript that does not fit with the rest. It is wrapped in old leather that seems to shine faintly under the light. Its cover carries a strange inscription in classical Arabic that reads, "Secrets of what came before Adam." Aisha feels her heart race as she gently places the manuscript on her desk. She has never seen anything like it before. The binding is strong but rough, and the pages carry a strange golden dust, as if they were written in a place between earth and sky. She opens the first page and finds an intricate diagram of circles spreading outward like ripples of water. Around the circles are symbols written in multiple languages. Some she recognizes as Arabic, others as Persian, but many are unfamiliar. The words speak of beings who walked the earth long before humans. There are mentions of the Jinn, created from smokeless fire, and mysterious listeners who are neither angel nor human. The text calls them guardians of thresholds, who remembered the earth before clay was shaped into mankind. Aisha feels chills as she reads. It is not a simple myth or a folk tale. The manuscript claims to record the testimonies of ancient witnesses who saw what existed before Prophet Adam, a.s. She spends hours studying the manuscript, forgetting her surroundings. The words flow like poetry, but carry the weight of history. Some passages describe cities that rose and fell before humans were created. Others speak of creatures made of light, shadows, and sound. The manuscript does not claim to be holy scripture, but instead presents itself as a record of voices collected over time. When evening comes, Aisha cannot keep the discovery to herself. She decides to visit Sheikh Harun, a retired scholar known for his deep knowledge of Islamic history and mysticism. He welcomes her kindly and listens as she explains what she has found. When he opens the manuscript and studies the writing, his eyes narrow with caution. "This is not an ordinary text," he says softly. "It is neither a history book nor a simple story. It belongs to a rare category of writings meant to preserve memory. It does not describe events like a chronicle. It collects fragments of testimonies that survived through whispers. These words may not be factual in the way we expect, but they carry meaning that is older than our records." Aisha listens carefully and then asks the question that burns inside her. "Does Islam say anything about beings before Adam, a.s.?" Sheikh Harun pauses before answering. "The Quran speaks of the creation of the Jinn before humankind. It also tells us about the angels. Beyond that, the text does not reveal much about what came before Adam, but silence in Scripture has often been filled by stories, and sometimes those stories preserve truths in symbolic form. What you hold may not be history in the strictest sense, but it could be a map of forgotten knowledge." Aisha realizes she cannot study this mystery alone. She begins gathering a small group of trusted people who can help her uncover the meaning of the manuscript. Among them is Dr. Farid, a linguist and historian who can trace the origins of old languages. There is Ibrahim, a traveler who has spent his life listening to folk tales from remote deserts and islands. And there is Layla, a gifted artist who captures ruins and forgotten places in her sketches. Together, they meet under a neem tree in a quiet courtyard and examine the manuscript. Each person feels the strange weight of the text in their own way. Dr. Farid wonders if it might be a forgery or a clever invention. Ibrahim recalls hearing desert songs about tribes that walked the earth before the first human. Layla sketches the diagrams with careful hands, sensing that the manuscript is more than myth. As they debate its meaning, one passage in particular catches their attention. It speaks of a place called the Tomb of Plenty, a ruin said to contain stones that remember footsteps from a time before mankind. The manuscript hints that those who seek to understand pre-human creation must begin there. Excitement and hesitation fill the group. If the place exists, they might find evidence of civilizations lost to memory. If it is only legend, they risk chasing shadows. Yet curiosity overcomes fear, and they decide to follow the manuscript's clues. Before the journey begins, Aisha dreams of a plain before dawn. In her dream, the ground hums like a living instrument. Figures move across the horizon, some human, others made of light and shadow. A voice speaks to her in a language she cannot understand, yet feels within her chest. It says, "We were witnesses before the one shaped from clay." When she wakes, she knows their journey has truly begun. The manuscript is not only a book, it is a key journey to the Tomb of Plenty. The following week, the group prepared for their journey. Dr. Farid spread old maps across his desk, tracing rivers and ancient trade routes with the careful hand of a man who trusted geography more than stories. Ibrahim spoke of his travels in the borderlands, where the desert meets the marsh, recalling local legends about ruins buried beneath salt and reeds. Layla sharpened her pencils and packed her sketchbooks, determined to capture every detail they might encounter. Aisha carried the manuscript carefully in a leather case, as though it were both treasure and responsibility. They traveled first by road, leaving behind the noise of the city. Their vehicle rattled along uneven tracks, passing through villages where children chased goats and elders told stories in shaded courtyards. By evening, they reached the banks of a wide river whose waters shimmered in the light of the setting sun. Ibrahim arranged for a boat, a simple wooden vessel, guided by a man with weathered hands and quiet eyes. The journey along the river was slow, the boat moving gently through reeds and the songs of birds that gathered at dusk. As night fell, they listened to Ibrahim share a story he had once heard from a fisherman. It spoke of a people who lived in this very region before humans were created, beings who shaped iron, not with fire, but with song. The tale described how their cities dissolved at sunrise, leaving behind only stones that whispered when the wind passed through them. Dr. Farid dismissed the story as metaphor, but even he could not deny the strange resonance it carried. Aisha silently compared it with a passage in the manuscript that spoke of echo cities woven of morning air. She began to feel that the text and the land were connected in ways beyond coincidence. On the third morning, they reached a desolate plain, where the river ended in shallow marshes. They disembarked and walked across cracked earth, carrying supplies on their backs. The air grew heavy with salt, and the horizon stretched endlessly. By late afternoon they saw it, a ring of low stones half buried in sand. The sight struck them into silence. The stones were arranged with a precision too deliberate to be natural. Each one was carved with grooves that spiraled inward, almost like the lines of a fingerprint. When the wind passed through the circle, a faint humming sound emerged, as if the stones were instruments, remembering an old song. They set up camp nearby and began their investigation. Layla sketched the stones from every angle, while Dr. Farid carefully measured distances and compared them to ancient records. Ibrahim walked slowly around the circle, murmuring to himself as though listening for voices hidden in the air. Aisha knelt beside one of the stones and traced the grooves with her fingers. She felt a warmth rise through her hand, as though the stone was not dead matter, but a vessel of memory. That night they sat by a small fire and read passages from the manuscript aloud. One section described guardians of thresholds who marked sacred spaces where the memory of earlier creations was preserved. Another spoke of a pendant made of dark glass, hidden beneath a stone, said to connect the seeker to voices of the past. At those words, Aisha's heart quickened. She remembered the dream in which she had seen beings crossing a plain before dawn. Could the manuscript be pointing them to something real? Driven by instinct, she returned to the circle after the others had fallen asleep. Under the pale light of the moon, she searched the base of the stones until her hand brushed against something hard and smooth. She dug carefully and uncovered a small object wrapped in ancient oilskin. Inside lay a pendant carved from a black glass-like material, cool to the touch yet strangely alive. As soon as she held it, a wave of images filled her mind. She saw shadows moving across deserts long before humans existed. She saw luminous beings shaping clay and water into forms that breathed only for a moment before dissolving. She heard whispers in a language without words, a rhythm that echoed like the heartbeat of the earth itself. For an instant she felt herself standing at the threshold between memory and reality. The next morning she revealed the pendant to the others. Dr. Farid studied it with scientific curiosity, while Ibrahim bowed his head as if recognizing something sacred. Layla sketched it with wide eyes, capturing the way light bent strangely across its surface. Sheikh Harun, who had traveled with them quietly and stayed mostly in the background, finally spoke. This pendant is not just an artifact. It is a key. But keys do not only open doors, they also demand responsibility. What you hold, Aisha, carries echoes of beings who existed before Adam. The manuscript speaks of them as witnesses and listeners. If you follow this path, you must be prepared for truths that cannot be measured by reason alone. The group agreed to continue their exploration. The manuscript mentioned another place beneath the plain, a hidden chamber said to hold the first echoes of pre-human creation. They began to search for an entrance, guided by fragments of text and the strange harmonies produced by the stones. For 3 days, they searched the area. On the 4th evening, as the sun dipped low, Ibrahim noticed a hollow near the edge of the stone ring. The ground there gave a faint echo when struck, as though concealing an empty space beneath. They cleared the sand and discovered a narrow passage leading downward. Aisha felt both fear and determination rise within her. She held the pendant tightly as they lit torches and prepared to descend. The air from the passage was cool and carried the scent of earth untouched for centuries. Before stepping into the darkness, Sheikh Harun raised his hand and reminded them, "We do not enter as conquerors but as listeners. This is not our domain. It belongs to what came before us. Walk with respect." They nodded, and one by one they descended into the hidden chamber, carrying with them the manuscript, the pendant, and a growing sense that they were crossing a threshold into a world that did not belong to human memory. The Chamber of Echoes. The narrow passage led downward into the earth, winding like the veins of an ancient body. Their torches threw trembling light across rough walls carved with strange patterns. The air was heavy, yet strangely alive, carrying the scent of stone mixed with something faintly sweet, like dried flowers. Every step echoed, as though unseen listeners walked beside them. At the end of the passage they reached a vast chamber. It stretched farther than their torchlight could reach, its ceiling lost in darkness. The walls were covered with carvings that shimmered faintly, not with paint or mineral, but with a glow that seemed to come from within the stone itself. The carvings were unlike any script Aisha had studied. Some resembled flowing rivers, others looked like constellations of stars, and some formed shapes that suggested beings neither human nor animal. In the center of the chamber stood a massive slab of black stone. Its surface was polished to such clarity that it reflected their faces as if it were water. Around the slab, smaller stones formed concentric circles, just like the diagrams in the manuscript. When they approached the center, the pendant in Aisha's hand grew warm and pulsed with a rhythm that matched her heartbeat. They placed the manuscript on the central stone and opened it to the page that had led them here. The words seemed to glow faintly in the torchlight, as though recognizing their surroundings. Sheikh Harun began to read aloud. His voice echoed unnaturally, as if the chamber itself was repeating each word with a tone slightly deeper than his own. The text described a time before the creation of mankind. It spoke of beings made of fire, beings of light, and others woven from sound and shadow. These were not myths to the scribe, but realities that walked the earth long before Adam was created. Some built cities that rose at dusk and vanished with dawn. Others guarded the elements, shaping rivers, mountains, and winds. Yet none bore the responsibility that would later be given to humankind. They were keepers and caretakers, but not stewards. As the words echoed across the chamber, the carvings on the walls began to shimmer more brightly. The shapes moved slowly, forming scenes that played like living memory. They saw vast deserts under violet skies filled with beings of fire dancing like flickering flames. They saw luminous figures crossing rivers of light, building structures from pure radiance. They saw shadows moving in silence, recording every event as if storing the memory of creation itself. Layla gasped as she sketched furiously, her hands struggling to keep pace with the visions unfolding on the walls. Dr. Farid stood frozen, his skepticism breaking under the weight of what his eyes could not deny. Ibrahim bowed his head, whispering prayers under his breath. Aisha felt her chest tighten, as if the chamber itself was pressing its memories into her. The pendant glowed brighter, and suddenly a deep vibration filled the chamber. From the central stone rose a faint figure, formed not of flesh, but of light and echo. It had no clear face, yet its presence carried the weight of ages. The figure spoke, not in words, but in resonance that filled their bones. Each of them understood in their own way, as if the voice shaped itself to their hearts. "We were the witnesses," the figure said. "We were guardians before clay was shaped into life. We carried the songs of the earth when no tongue yet spoke. We walked in silence and remembered for the sake of those who would come after." The group stood in awe. Aisha stepped forward, clutching the pendant. "Who were you? What were you called?" she asked, her voice trembling. The figure's light shifted, forming images rather than words. They saw the Jinn, wild and fiery, ruling the earth with passion and conflict. They saw beings of light serving in ranks of harmony and order. They saw watchers who stood between worlds, neither angel nor Jinn, whose duty was to preserve memory until the appointed time. "You know us only through fragments," the figure finally resonated. "Your scriptures speak of fire and clay, of angels and mankind. But between these, there were other orders of creation, each with purpose, each fading when their time was complete. We remained only as echoes, so that when humankind asked who came before, the earth would not stay silent." Sheikh Harun lowered his head. "Are you truth or vision?" he asked softly. The figure replied, "We are memory. We are not here to give proof, but to remind. What you see is not for argument, but for understanding. Do not seek to master these mysteries. Carry them with humility." Suddenly the chamber shook with a low rumble. Dust fell from the ceiling and the torches flickered. The figure began to fade back into the stone. Before disappearing, it left one final message. Adam was not the beginning of creation. He was the beginning of responsibility. Remember this truth and carry it with care. When the chamber grew silent again, the group stood breathless. The carvings on the walls returned to stillness, the glow fading into ordinary stone. Only the pendant continued to pulse faintly in Aisha's hand. They left the chamber slowly, each step heavy with the weight of what they had witnessed. Outside, the night skies stretched endlessly, the stars burning with ancient fire. None of them spoke for a long while. Each was lost in thought, struggling to understand the meaning of what they had seen. At last, Sheikh Harun broke the silence. "We came searching for answers, but were given responsibility. The question is not only who existed before Adam. The question is what we are meant to learn from those who came before." The others nodded, knowing his words carried truth. Yet deep inside, Aisha felt that their journey was not over. The manuscript contained more pages, more secrets waiting to be uncovered, and the pendant still glowed, as if urging her to continue the search. They had entered the threshold of memory, but beyond it lay mysteries even greater. The Last Testament, the night after their return from the chamber, was filled with silence. The group sat around the fire, each lost in thought. The stars above looked sharper, as though the heavens themselves were listening. The manuscript rested between them, its pages fluttering in the cool wind as if alive. The pendant lay beside it, glowing faintly with a steady light. Aisha stared into the fire, her heart heavy with questions. What had they truly witnessed? Were the visions meant as proof or as lessons? The figure had said that Adam was the beginning of responsibility, not the beginning of creation. That single truth had shaken her more than anything else. The following morning, they prepared to leave the ruins. Yet before they departed, Sheikh Harun insisted on reading the remaining pages of the manuscript. They gathered around him while the sun rose slowly over the horizon, bathing the stones in golden light. The last section of the manuscript spoke of a cycle of creations. It described how each form of life was given its season on earth. The Jinn had ruled once, building kingdoms and waging wars until their corruption led to their downfall. Other beings, less known, had walked quietly, tending to the earth and remembering its secrets, but they too faded when their time ended. Finally came mankind, shaped from clay and given the trust of responsibility. Unlike the others, humanity was given choice, the freedom to rise to greatness or fall into ruin. These are not stories of power, Sheikh Harun explained. They are stories of trust. Every creation had its moment, but only humans were asked to carry responsibility for what they do. That is what sets Adam apart. The words sank deeply into their hearts. Dr. Farid, who had begun this journey with skepticism, now saw history not as a straight line, but as a layered memory. Layla looked at her sketches, realizing they were more than drawings of ruins. They were windows into forgotten worlds. Ibrahim closed his eyes and whispered prayers of gratitude for being chosen to witness such mysteries. Aisha held the pendant and felt it pulse gently in her hand. It no longer filled her with visions, but with a calm certainty, as if its task was complete. She realized then that the manuscript and the pendant were not meant to prove who came before Adam. They were meant to remind humanity of its role. The pre-human creations were part of a larger story, one in which mankind was not the first to walk the earth, but was the first to bear the burden of choice and moral responsibility. With reverence, they sealed the manuscript and wrapped the pendant once more in oilskin. Sheikh Harun advised that these relics should not be displayed in museums or hidden in vaults. Knowledge like this is not for display, he said. It is for reflection. If it is misused, it will create arrogance. If it is remembered with humility, it will guide hearts. The group agreed and decided to keep the location of the chamber a secret. They would carry the memory of what they had seen, but share its lessons through wisdom rather than spectacle. Their journey back was quiet. Villages and roads passed by, but their minds were still within the chamber of echoes. When they finally returned to the city, they went their separate ways, but remained bound by what they had experienced together. Years later, Aisha would often sit by her window at night, the manuscript safely preserved in the institute, and think of the words the figure had spoken. Adam was not the beginning of creation, he was the beginning of responsibility. Those words echoed in her life every time she faced choices, reminding her that mankind's true task was not to ask who came before, but how to honor the trust given after. In the end, the mystery was not solved with proof or certainty. The stones, the pendant, and the visions all remained fragments of memory. Yet the story carried its truth in a different way. It reminded those who listened that the earth is older than human pride, that civilizations rose and vanished before mankind, and that the role of humanity is not to boast of being the first, but to live with the responsibility of being the chosen. And so the manuscript's final lesson became clear. The secrets of pre-human creation were not meant to diminish mankind, but to humble it, to remind every soul that walking upon the earth is a trust, and that before Adam many had walked, but only Adam's children were given the freedom to shape destiny. With that understanding, Aisha closed the chapter of her journey. She carried no proof to show the world, only the memory of echoes and the responsibility of wisdom. And in her heart she knew that this was enough.